was thinking of going fishing tomorrow, and I'm looking for a worm.
So bad at this, I'm like Bambi on ice.
You weren't just stylish. You were untouchable, electric, alive in a way that today's world has quietly erased. What happened to the feeling of being truly cool? And why does it haunt us now? Owning a killer vinyl collection was not just about music, it was an identity. If you walked into someone's room and saw records from Fleetwood Mac, Led Zeppelin, or the Bee Gees stacked near the turntable, you knew exactly what kind of person they were. The crackle of the needle hitting the record was a sound that made people stop and smile. You were cool if you knew every word to Go Your Own Way and could air guitar your way through a Led Zeppelin solo like you had been to the concert yourself. The album covers alone were prized possessions. People framed them, displayed them, and showed them off with pride. You were not buying music. You were building a shrine. You memorized the track order. You judged friends based on their taste. And when someone came over, you did not stream anything. You handed them the record, let them feel the weight of it, and dropped the needle with reverence. If your record crate had deep cuts and limited pressings, you were not just cool. You were untouchable. It was not about trends. It was about soul. You felt music in your bones, and people could feel that about you. That was the power of vinyl. Disco fever was not just a dance trend, it was an obsession. You were cool if you owned a glittery shirt, wore platform shoes, and could hustle your way across a spinning light-up floor like you were born there. From roller rinks to velvet-lined clubs, disco was your ticket to being somebody. And if you made it to Studio 54, you were legendary. But the truth is, you did not even need New York City to catch the fever. Small-town discos popped up like mushrooms after rain, and every Friday night the local rink turned into a glitter-drenched playground. You danced because it felt like freedom. You were not thinking about bills, your job, or what your hair looked like. You were just feeling the beat and losing yourself in it. When Stayin' Alive came on, it was like church. People wore gold chains and silk, and somehow nobody ever seemed to sweat. It was a scene. And if you could master a spin, a dip, or that iconic finger-to-the-sky Travolta pose, everyone knew your name. Cool in the 1970s had a mirror ball hanging over it and the thump of a bass line under your feet. And that glitter? That was not decoration. That was a badge of honor. If you had a concert tee in the 1970s, you were not just dressing. You were making a statement. A faded shirt with the Rolling Stones lips or the iconic Pink Floyd prism was like armor. People looked at you differently. They assumed you had seen things, felt things. The louder the print, the cooler the kid. But here's the kicker. Half the people wearing them had not even been to the concert. That did not matter. What mattered was that you looked like you belonged to something bigger. And if you actually had been there, if you really did stand in the pouring rain at a Led Zeppelin show or felt the ground shake when Kiss came on stage, then your shirt was a relic. You washed it gently. You wore it proudly. And if someone tried to copy your look without earning it, you called them out. A concert tee was not just cotton and ink. It was lived experience. It said, I was there when music meant something. And if it had rips or stains, that only made it more legit. That shirt could outlive friendships and survive every trend because it was not about fashion. It was about fire. And that fire? That made you cool. The sound of an 8-track tape clicking into place is something that can hit you like a memory you forgot you had. If you were cruising in your car in the 1970s with an 8-track blasting, you were living the dream. The tapes were bulky, loud, and completely impractical by today's standards, but none of that mattered. You did not care about rewinding or skipping songs. You just let the music play. The player sat like royalty in your dashboard, and it told the world something important. You had taste. You had a Camaro or a Trans Am. You had long hair, a cigarette in hand, and maybe a pair of aviators on. And when you slid in an 8-track of Creedence Clearwater Revival or the Eagles, it was not just background noise. It was a vibe. Your friends piled into the back seat, the windows rolled down, and the whole night felt infinite. The sound quality was fuzzy, the tape might get stuck, but it was yours. That was the magic. In a world without shuffle or streaming, every second of that music was intentional. You sat with it, you felt it, and everyone knew If your car had an 8-track player, you were cooler than the rest. Loving the Bee Gees or ABBA in the 1970s was not a guilty pleasure. It was a cultural movement. These were not just bands. They were larger-than-life icons. Their voices came through every radio, every record player, every house party that went past midnight. If you knew the lyrics to Dancing Queen or could hit the falsetto in Night Fever, people took notice. ABBA made you feel glamorous. The Bee Gees made you feel alive. You were cool if you let their music take over your soul and move your body without shame. People might have acted too cool for disco, but behind closed doors, everyone was dancing. Their posters were on your wall. Their songs were the soundtrack of breakups, makeups, and Friday night dreams. You hummed them at work. You sang them in the shower. You spun around to them in your living room like it was your own stage. They were fun. They were fabulous. And if someone said they were too pop, too shiny, too soft, you knew they just did not get it. To love the Bee Gees or ABBA was to embrace joy without irony. And that kind of confidence? That was the truest kind of cool. Quoting MASH or All in the Family meant you had your finger on the pulse. These were not just shows, they were conversation starters. If you knew what Hawkeye said last week or laughed at Archie Bunker's latest rant, you were dialed into what America was really talking about. You were cool not because you watched TV, but because you understood it. These shows were not fluff. They were funny, yes, but they were raw. They took risks. They said what other shows were afraid to. MASH made you cry without warning, then laugh through the tears. All in the Family made you uncomfortable, then made you think. And if you could quote them, it meant you had depth. You got the joke and the point behind it. At school or work, you would toss out a line and people would nod. They knew. That shared language? That made you feel seen. The laugh track might have been canned, but the stories were not. These shows held up a mirror to the world, and you were brave enough to look. In a decade of change, quoting them was more than entertainment. It was a sign you were tuned in, and that was seriously cool. Watching Charlie's Angels or The Mary Tyler Moore Show made you believe in power. These women were not background characters. They were bold, brilliant, and absolutely impossible to ignore. If you watched them religiously, it said something about you. You admired strength. You respected charm. You understood charisma. You were cool if you believed that women could be the center of the story, and not just the supporting cast. Charlie's Angels gave us action, drama, fashion. These women kicked doors down in heels and never looked back. The Mary Tyler Moore Show gave us warmth and wit, showing that independence could be beautiful. She tossed her hat in the air, and every girl wanted to be her. Every guy wanted to date her, or be her. If you stayed in on a Tuesday night to catch an episode, that was not lame. That was culture. These women set the tone, and if you were paying attention, you picked up the cues. Their catchphrases, their courage, their style, it all soaked into who you were becoming. Watching these shows meant you believed in a new kind of cool, one where confidence was the outfit and intelligence was the accessory. If you were staying up late for Saturday Night Live in the 1970s, you were not just watching comedy. You were witnessing rebellion. You were cool if you knew when to sneak into the living room, keep the volume just low enough, and soak in every second of a show your parents probably did not want you watching. The cast? Legends in the making. Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi. They were not telling jokes. They were pulling the rug out from under the country and laughing while they did it. The sketches were weird, wild, dangerous, and you loved every second. You quoted them at school the next day. You mimicked the voices. You tried to explain the jokes to people who just did not get it. And that made you feel superior. This was not safe television. It was live. Anything could happen. Anything did. And if you were part of that midnight crowd, you were in on something. The rest of the world could have their sitcoms. You had chaos. You had brilliance. You had Saturday night. That kind of cool was not handed out. It was earned by losing sleep and gaining insight. Following The Love Boat and Chips meant you liked your drama with a side of flair. These were not just shows. They were events. If you were glued to the screen every week, you were chasing adventure without leaving your couch. The Love Boat was a floating soap opera wrapped in sequins and soft jazz. It made you believe romance could be just a deck away. Chips, on the other hand, was horsepower and highway patrol. It made motorcycles look cooler than ever. And if you were into both, you were unstoppable. You knew how to shift gears from love to action like a pro. Your eyes lit up when the opening theme started. You hummed along without thinking. The plots were sometimes ridiculous, but that was half the fun. These shows let you feel like anything was possible. Love, danger, a wild twist before the commercial break. They made everyday life feel just a little more dramatic. And being part of that? Being someone who followed along every week? That meant you had style. You knew entertainment when you saw it. And the people who rolled their eyes just did not get the magic. Laughing with Sanford and Son or The Jeffersons meant you understood that comedy could carry truth. These were not just funny shows, they were firecrackers. Red Fox's timing in Sanford and Son was sharp as a blade. His grumbles, his insults, that infamous fake heart attack. It was all gold. But it was not just laughs. It was survival. It was grit. It was watching a man struggle, love, and hustle all at once. And The Jeffersons? That was the American dream in a sitcom. George Jefferson was loud, proud, and not afraid to tell the world exactly who he was. If you laughed at these shows, you were not just entertained, you were educated. You saw how race, class, and dignity tangled and clashed. But the jokes never stopped. They hit hard, and they hit home. Watching these shows made you sharper, cooler, wiser. You could laugh with the best of them, but you also knew the layers underneath. And that kind of understanding, that kind of awareness, that was the cool that never fades. Riding a big wheel in the 1970s was not just a way to get around, it was a declaration of freedom. You were not just cool. You were the king or queen of the block, thundering down sidewalks with that iconic plastic rumble beneath you. The big wheel had swagger, low to the ground, built for speed, or at least what felt like speed when you were 5 years old. And that giant front wheel, that was the stuff of legend. Kids who owned one did not walk anywhere. They glided, skidded, and spun their way through the neighborhood. Bonus points if you could pull off the power slide and leave streaks across the pavement like a real daredevil. The big wheel made you feel grown up while keeping you completely rooted in joy. It did not matter if your knees were up to your chest or if the handlebar stickers were peeling. As long as it rolled, you were golden. Parents loved it because it was safer than a bike, but you did not care about safety. You cared about style. You parked it with pride outside your friend's house and hoped nobody dared to touch it. You etched your name into the plastic. You raced. You ruled. And the moment you outgrew it, that was the first real heartbreak of childhood. Playing with Nerf balls in the 1970s was every kid's dream come true. For the first time, you could throw things inside the house and not get grounded for it. A foam ball meant freedom. It meant no more shattered lamps or broken vases, just pure, guilt-free chaos. If you had a Nerf ball, you were automatically the MVP of every living room pickup game. Football, basketball, dodgeball, even made-up sports with made-up rules. Nerf made them all better. You were cool if you had one, and even cooler if you had a whole collection. Neon orange, lime green, sky blue. They came in colors that felt like candy, and everybody wanted a bite. The commercials said it was safe, soft, and fun. And for once, the commercials were telling the truth. Friends came over just to play with your Nerf gear. You made up games that would never make sense to adults, and that was the point. And if someone got hit in the face, no problem. Just laugh and keep playing. The Nerf ball was rebellion wrapped in softness. It let you be wild without the consequences. And if you ever got the Nerf football, forget about it. You were a legend. You learned how to spiral it like a quarterback, even if your hands were too small to grip it right. That foam turned boring afternoons into full-blown adventures. Owning a pet rock was one of the weirdest things that ever made someone cool. But in the 1970s, it was genius. It was peak novelty, the ultimate conversation starter, and somehow a complete cultural reset. You were not just buying a rock, You were adopting a lifestyle. The packaging was half the magic, a cardboard box with air holes and straw like you were taking home a puppy. And the rock inside? Just a rock. Smooth, gray, and totally silent. But that was the point. It was low maintenance, no mess, and never talked back. If you had one, you were in on the joke, but also kind of serious about it. People gave them names, drew faces on them, even painted little accessories. It was the first time a product told you that less was more. You were not just being silly, you were being clever. And that made you cool. Some people rolled their eyes, but secretly, they wanted one too. The pet rock became a symbol of 1970s irony, rebellion, and weird genius all at once. It was anti-pet, anti-hassle, anti-everything your parents expected you to care about. And it still made you smile. If your rock had a home on your desk, a name in your notebook, and a backstory only you knew, you got it. You were not just cool, you were culturally fluent. Mastering the Rubik's Cube was like unlocking a secret language of the universe. When the cube first hit shelves in the late 1970s, it looked innocent enough, just a colorful little puzzle. But twist it once, and suddenly it was chaos. The colors scrambled, the pieces danced, and your mission became clear: solve it or die trying. Kids who could solve the Rubik's Cube were instant legends. You saw one spinning it calmly during lunch, and you knew they were built different. Solving it once was impressive. Solving it under a minute? You might as well have been Einstein. People practiced in their rooms, hunched over it for hours, whispering algorithms like magic spells. Cool did not always mean loud or flashy. Sometimes it meant quiet determination, clever fingers, and a mind that did not quit. And if you peeled the stickers off to cheat, everyone knew. That was social suicide. The Rubik's Cube was not just a toy, it was a challenge, a status symbol, a rite of passage, and it made your brain feel like a machine. You would keep it in your backpack, twist it during class, and act casual when someone asked, "Can you actually solve that thing?" Then you did. And the look on their face? Worth every second. Collecting Star Wars action figures was not just a hobby, it was a mission. After the 1977 release of the movie, kids everywhere scrambled to get their hands on Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Darth Vader, and the rest of the gang. If you had the Millennium Falcon or the Death Star playset, you were practically royalty on your block. Star Wars changed everything. You did not just watch it, you lived in it. And the action figures? They were your keys to that galaxy far, far away. Your bedroom floor became Hoth. Your backyard was Tatooine. You wrote your own stories, battled your own villains, and decided who lived or died. And you never lost the tiny accessories, because losing Luke's lightsaber felt like losing a limb. Cool kids knew all the names, the lesser-known droids, the aliens in the background. They traded doubles with precision. And if you kept the packaging intact, that was next level. The Kenner line was not just plastic, it was power. You could not bring lightsabers to school, but you could bring Han Solo in your backpack and get instant respect. These toys were not about having fun. They were about building worlds, shaping imagination, and proving your loyalty to the biggest movie event of the decade. Wearing bell-bottoms and platform shoes meant you did not just walk, you made an entrance. Bell-bottoms flared out like they had their own agenda. The wider they were, the cooler you were. If they swished when you walked, even better. You strutted, you did not stroll. And those platform shoes? They were skyscrapers on your feet. It was about adding height, but it was also about drama. Boys and girls wore them with equal pride, stomping down sidewalks like runways. You could not be shy in bell-bottoms. They demanded attention. They made your legs look 10 miles long and your confidence shoot through the roof. Pair them with a glittery shirt or a fringe vest, and you were the definition of 1970s cool. They made music sound better. They made the disco ball shine harder. Every dance move looked smoother. And when you walked into a room, you did not just arrive. You announced yourself. Cool in the 1970s was not quiet. It was loud, bold, unapologetic. And if your pants could knock over a drink or get caught in the car door, that was the price of greatness. You looked at the skinny jeans of later decades and just laughed. Bell-bottoms were art. Rocking tie-dye shirts in the 1970s was like wearing your soul on your chest. You could not buy that kind of vibe off the rack. Cool kids either made their own or knew someone who did. Every swirl, every burst of color told its own story. It was rebellion soaked in dye. It said you were not afraid of standing out, of being different, of being loud in a world that wanted quiet. Tie-dye was part art project, part political statement, part badge of identity. You wore it to concerts, to school, to the park, anywhere you wanted to feel like yourself. And when someone asked where you got it, the coolest answer was, "I made it." That meant you knew the ropes, rubber bands, buckets, gloves, the whole messy magic. Your hands were stained for days afterward, and that was a flex. Tie-dye was about peace, love, and sticking it to the man, but mostly it was about expression. No two shirts were alike, and if yours had just the right burst of violet next to the green spiral, you knew you had nailed it. The shirt was not just cool, it was you. In a decade bursting with color and energy, tie-dye was a way to carry that vibe everywhere you went. Sporting feathered hair or an afro in the 1970s was like wearing a crown you styled yourself. You were cool if your hair had bounce, volume, shape, and most importantly, attitude. Feathered hair was smooth, effortless, and perfectly layered. You ran a brush through it and it fell into place like a slow-motion shampoo commercial. Farrah Fawcett? The gold standard. Every girl with a blow dryer and a dream tried to capture that wind-blown magic. And for the boys, it was all about the swoop. The longer, the better. You had to keep it just messy enough to say you did not care, while clearly caring a lot. On the other side of the hair spectrum was the afro. Big, bold, and rooted in pride. It was not just a style, it was a statement. You were honoring your roots, your culture, your voice. The afro turned heads. It broke rules. It celebrated Black beauty in all its natural glory. And if you could pick it out to the perfect shape, cool did not even begin to describe it. Hair in the 1970s was about identity, power, and flair. It was not just part of the look, it was the look. Donning a leisure suit in the 1970s was the male equivalent of putting on armor. Polyester armor, sure, but armor nonetheless. You were not trying to blend in. You were trying to melt faces with pure charm, and that matching jacket and flared pants combo, that was your weapon. If you walked into a party in a baby blue leisure suit, you did not need to say a word. People looked. People noticed. The shirts were often silky, the collars dangerously wide, and the shoes polished like you had a date with destiny. The leisure suit was all about confidence. You wore it to discos, weddings, maybe even job interviews if you were brave enough. The fabric did not breathe, the colors were sometimes offensive to the eye, but you did not care. That was part of the thrill. It was unapologetic style, the kind that made people remember you even if they hated your outfit. And if you paired it with gold chains and cologne, forget about it. You were a walking advertisement for cool. Leisure suits were bold, they were fun, and in hindsight, maybe a little bit ridiculous. But back then, that was exactly what made them legendary. Accessorizing with mood rings was like wearing your heart on your finger, literally. These tiny, shifting gems were everywhere in the 1970s, and owning one meant you were tuned into something mysterious, maybe even magical. They promised to show your emotions through color, and whether or not that science held up, nobody cared. Blue meant calm. Green meant happy. Black? Look out. People believed in it just enough to check constantly, waiting for the next shade to reveal their true state. You were cool if you flashed your ring and casually said, "It turns purple when I am in love." And people listened. The ring was more than jewelry. It was a conversation starter, a social decoder, and a fashion statement all at once. You slipped it on like a secret weapon. Kids swapped them at school. Adults wore them on dates. Some even claimed they worked better than therapy. The truth? It probably just responded to your body heat. But that did not stop the wonder. That little shifting color stone captured the 1970s obsession with self-expression, mystery, and groovy science. And even if your mood never really matched the color, the feeling you got wearing it was always the same: cool. Driving a muscle car in the 1970s was the closest thing to being a rock star without picking up a guitar. You did not just own a Dodge Challenger or a Pontiac Firebird, you commanded one. It roared when you turned the key, it growled when you hit the gas, and it screamed cool before you even rolled down the street. The body was sleek, aggressive, like it was built to punch wind in the face. The paint jobs? Loud, orange, lime green, deep candy red, colors that made people stop and stare. The sound system blasted whatever anthem made you feel alive that day, and if your windows were down, everyone within 3 blocks knew what you were about. These cars were not subtle, and that was the point. A muscle car was more than a machine. It was your image, your soundtrack, your ego on wheels. You lined up at red lights and glanced sideways, daring someone to challenge you. You cleaned it by hand every Saturday and parked it like it was made of gold. The interior smelled like gasoline and dreams. You were cool because you drove something that made no apologies. It sucked gas, it broke speed limits, and it was worth every second. People did not forget the sound of your car pulling into the lot. You were the kid with the car everyone wanted, even if they would not admit it. And when you revved the engine, it felt like the world was holding its breath just for you. Skating at the roller rink in the 1970s was the ultimate social arena. If you could skate backwards, turn on a dime, or spin to the rhythm of Boogie Oogie Oogie, then you were not just cool, you were untouchable. The lights were always dim, the disco ball cast glitter on the floor, and the music pumped like your own personal anthem. People lined the walls watching, pretending they were just resting, but really, they were checking you out. Every move mattered. Every twirl, every cross-leg glide, it all told the room who you were. Skating was not just about balance, it was about swagger. The floor was a stage, and your skates were your ticket to fame. You had your favorite spot in the locker area, maybe your own laces or wheels if you were serious. And if you knew the DJ, you were royalty. Couples held hands, groups formed trains, and breakups happened between laps. Your outfit had to match the mood. Tight jeans, silky shirts, bangles that clinked when you moved. The whole rink smelled like sweat, popcorn, and possibility. And when the slow song hit, the lights dimmed even more. That was your chance. You asked, or you waited to be asked. Either way, it felt like magic. This was the place where legends were born, where friendships started, where hearts were broken, and where you found out if you could truly dance on wheels. Wearing circular sunglasses in the 1970s was like putting on a filter before filters even existed. These were not just sunglasses, they were a vibe. They whispered, "I'm deep," and shouted, "I'm different." Inspired by the ever-iconic John Lennon, they gave every face a mysterious, soulful edge. The frames were thin, the lenses tinted just enough to make everything feel cinematic. Some were gold-rimmed, others silver. A few were oversized, drooping low over the cheeks like you had something to hide, and everyone wanted to know what it was. Circular sunglasses were the kind of cool that did not ask for attention but got it anyway. You wore them in record shops, on porches, at protests, and in the back of your friend's van while the stereo played something trippy and long. They made you look like you had stories, like you had just come back from somewhere important. And if you paired them with long hair or a denim jacket, forget it. That was visual poetry. These sunglasses were not practical. They were barely useful in bright sun. But they transformed your whole face into a symbol. People looked at you differently when you wore them. They assumed you listened to better music, read better books, kissed better. You kept them on indoors, even when it made no sense, just because the world looked cooler through them. And the truth? It did. Listening to AM radio hits in the 1970s was like hearing your heart broadcast over the airwaves. There was no screen, no playlist, no skipping. Just you, your transistor radio, and whatever song fate decided to send your way. The signal was always just a little fuzzy, sometimes a crackle, sometimes a fade. But that only made the music feel more alive. You held the radio close, like it was sacred. Maybe it sat on your nightstand. Maybe it rode shotgun on long road trips. Either way, it was a lifeline. You were cool if you knew which station played the good stuff and exactly when the top 40 countdown came on. The voice of the DJ was like an old friend, someone who guided you through heartbreak and summer crushes with the right song at the right time. American Pie, Hotel California, I Will Survive. They were not just hits, they were timestamps. The music carried the weight of the world, but also the weight of your world, your problems, your dreams, your secret fears. You sang along in private. You learned every lyric without realizing it. And when you heard your favorite song start up, you turned that little plastic knob and soaked it in like gospel. AM radio was where cool lived, in the static, the suspense, the surprise. Using a lava lamp in the 1970s was like keeping a piece of the cosmos on your nightstand. It was hypnotic, groovy, a little mysterious. You flicked the switch and waited, like lighting a slow-burning fuse of wonder. First it glowed, then it shifted. Globs of colored wax floating, stretching, breaking apart and reforming like some dreamy slow-motion ballet. You did not just watch a lava lamp, you got lost in it. It was the background to late-night phone calls, to daydreams, to entire evenings spent staring at the ceiling while your record played for the third time. If you had a lava lamp, you were cool because you got it. You understood that atmosphere mattered. That mood was everything. People came into your room and immediately knew something about you without you saying a word. Maybe you were into science fiction. Maybe you wrote poems. Maybe you just liked to feel things deeply. Whatever the case, the lamp told them that your mind moved slower and deeper than theirs. They made them in electric pink, swamp green, fiery red, each one bubbling with quiet rebellion. Lava lamps did not care about utility. They were pure aesthetic, pure feel. In a time before smartphones and streaming, you had to make your own magic. And the lava lamp? That was it. Your own personal universe drifting in a glass bottle, glowing just for you. Waterbeds promised the future and delivered waves of regret. On paper, they were perfect, a heated mattress that cradled your body like a floating dream. But in practice, not so much. Every turn sent ripples across the surface. You tried to roll over, and the whole bed sloshed like a bathtub during an earthquake. Getting in without making a tidal wave was a skill. Getting out without sliding to the floor was an Olympic event. They were heavy, hard to move, and leaked at the worst times, usually at 3 in the morning, soaking everything from socks to shag carpet. Still, they were trendy. If someone had a waterbed, it meant they were either incredibly cool or easily convinced by an in-store demo. Some people swore by them. Others swore at them. Pets hated them. Kids loved jumping on them until they learned that waterbeds and sharp objects do not mix. But for a brief, glorious window in the 1980s, having a waterbed meant you had arrived. It was furniture and flex all in one. Looking back, they were impractical, ridiculous, and unforgettable. And somewhere, in a dusty corner of a basement, one is still gently sloshing, waiting for its comeback. Mood rings promised to read your soul. Slip one on, and suddenly your finger was a window into your emotions. Or so we thought. The magic came from a tiny, color-changing stone set into a thick metal or plastic band. It shifted hues depending on temperature, but as kids, we believed it told the truth. If it turned blue, you were calm. If it went black, you were angry. Green? Maybe in love. We studied those little charts that came with the ring like they were sacred scrolls. Every recess and sleepover had at least one person interpreting moods. Sure, the science was sketchy, and sure, it mostly just reflected how cold or hot your hands were, but to us, it was real magic. It felt like the ring knew something we did not. Every kid had one, lost one, or begged their parents to buy one from a gas station or gift shop. The band turned your finger green eventually, but you wore it anyway. It was a talisman, a tiny crystal mood detector that let you feel seen, even if it was just a gimmick. To this day, nothing quite compares to the mystery and wonder packed into one shimmering, shifting little stone. No child in the 1970s felt cooler than when riding a big wheel. With its huge front wheel, low-riding plastic seat, and bright colors, it looked like a race car designed by a kid, because it basically was. Once you hopped on and pushed those plastic pedals, you were not just moving, you were flying. Sidewalks became speedways, driveways became danger zones, and every slope was a dare. The sound of the wheels grinding on concrete was a soundtrack of summer. Every kid knew how to drift, how to slam the brake and spin out in a glorious slide that made you feel like a stuntman. Scraped knees were badges of honor. Big wheels were not built to last, but that only made you ride harder. They cracked, they faded. But while they worked, they were unstoppable. Parents loved them because they were safe. Kids loved them because they felt anything but. Riding a big wheel gave you that first taste of rebellion. You could go fast, steer wild, and race your friends with nothing between you and the road but a thin piece of plastic. It was freedom on three wheels, and for many 1970s kids, it was their first vehicle and their first addiction to speed. Giant scrunchies were not just hair ties, they were statements. Big, bold, and often made of velvet or shiny satin, they wrapped around ponytails like fabric donuts. One was never enough. Some girls stacked them. Others coordinated them with earrings, shirts, or shoelaces. You might even wear one on your wrist, just in case your hair needed managing at a moment's notice. They came in every color of the rainbow and every pattern imaginable. Leopard print? Check. Neon green? Of course. Polka dots the size of your thumb? Why not? Scrunchies were soft, gentle on your hair, and perfect for the sky-high ponytails the 1980s demanded. Some had sequins, some had bows. All of them made your hair look like it was ready to host a party. You could spot a scrunchie from across the school cafeteria. It bounced when you walked and made even the messiest bun look intentional. Looking back, they seem oversized and silly, but that was the point. Scrunchies were playful, practical, and loud in the best possible way. And even though they disappeared for a while, anyone who wore one back then knows, you never really outgrow the joy of tossing your hair into a cloud of fabric. The kitchen of the 1970s did not just serve food, it made a statement. And that statement was harvest gold and avocado green. These two colors dominated every American kitchen appliance. Your refrigerator, your stove, even your blender wore these colors like a uniform. It was not just paint, it was identity. These colors were supposed to represent nature, health, and a touch of luxury. Harvest gold had a warm golden glow that felt like sunlight. Avocado green was earthy and bold, a perfect match for the indoor plant movement and natural fiber craze of the time. But somewhere along the way, the trend turned into a punchline. Yet, for those who lived it, there is no forgetting. You remember the heavy click of the fridge door, the way the green surface reflected your face in the oven window, the hum of the blender making root beer floats. These were not sleek or modern. They were sturdy, reliable, and filled with the smells of Sunday dinners and burnt toast. Maybe you were not fond of these colors as a kid. Maybe you even hated them. But when you see them now, something deep inside stirs. They are more than colors. They are the palette of your childhood. If Sesame Street was your preschool best friend, the Electric Company was your cool older sibling. Airing in the 1970s, it was wild, fast-paced, and just a little bit chaotic in the best way. It taught reading through sketches, songs, animations, and goofy superheroes who shouted phonics like they were battle cries. It was loud, it was weird, and it was impossible to forget. With a cast that included Morgan Freeman and Rita Moreno, the Electric Company did not talk down to kids, it pulled them up. It made reading feel like something urgent, something fun, something that could change the world. You did not just sit back and watch, you joined in. You sounded out words with them. You felt like part of the team. It blurred the line between learning and entertainment. It showed that intelligence and humor were not opposites. They were partners. And for kids who felt bored or left behind in school, the Electric Company gave them a way in. a way to laugh and learn at the same time. It was messy and magical, full of wordplay and wonder, and it proved that even the alphabet could be electric. Trapper Keepers were not just school supplies, they were status symbols. With their Velcro flaps and glossy, over-the-top covers, they turned every classroom into a silent competition of who had the coolest binder. Some featured racing cars. Others showed rainbows, unicorns, or abstract laser patterns straight out of a sci-fi fever dream. Inside, everything was neatly organized. Folders, dividers, loose-leaf paper, and secret notes passed during math class. The Velcro made a loud rip every time you opened it, an announcement that learning was about to begin, or at least be attempted. Trapper Keepers made you feel like you had your life together, even if your grades said otherwise. Teachers had a love-hate relationship with them. They were bulky, distracting, but undeniably effective at keeping your stuff in one place. And if you had one with a matching pencil case, you were royalty. Years later, people still remember the smell of the plastic, the feel of flipping through those laminated folders, and the thrill of sliding in a new pack of notebook paper. Trapper Keepers were not just for school, they were for showing off, staying organized, and feeling like you had a little piece of the future in your backpack. Shrinky Dinks were magic in plastic form. You started with a sheet, clear, flexible, and begging to be colored. You grabbed your markers, drew a wild design, cut it out with safety scissors, and popped it in the oven. What came out was a tiny, hardened version of your masterpiece, often warped but always perfect. Watching it shrink behind the oven door was part of the thrill. You would kneel on the floor, peering through the glass, and gasp as your drawing curled, twisted, and finally flattened. Kids made keychains, jewelry, ornaments. Whatever their imagination allowed, it felt like crafting with sorcery. One minute, you were tracing cartoons or making friendship tags. The next, you held a miniaturized relic in your palm. The smell of melting plastic filled the kitchen. Parents worried, but no one stopped us. Shrinky Dinks were affordable, creative, and wildly popular at every sleepover and birthday party. You could even buy branded kits, superheroes, cartoon characters, holiday themes. But the best ones were always your originals. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing your art transformed like that. Tiny, tough, and totally unique. We never questioned the process. We just knew it felt like creating something real, something small that still felt huge. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was not flashy. It had no lasers, no puppets doing pratfalls, no catchy jingles, but it had something better, genuine warmth. Fred Rogers, with his cardigan sweater and calm voice, welcomed every child as if they were the most important person in the world. And to many, he was the only adult who ever did. Debuting in 1968 but shaping hearts well into the 1970s, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was slow, simple, and radical in its kindness. It was not a show you watched for action. It was a show you watched to feel safe. Fred Rogers talked about emotions, anger, sadness, fear, and he did it without blinking. He told you it was okay to feel, that you were not alone, that being a child was hard, and that your feelings mattered. There was no pressure to be funny or smart or fast. You just had to be yourself. That was enough. The land of make-believe added whimsy, but it was always grounded in care. Mr. Rogers did not perform for you. He spoke to you, and that made all the difference. For many kids, his neighborhood was not just a television set, it was a sanctuary. A quiet reminder that love could be gentle, and that you were loved just by being you. Television Guide was the original streaming schedule, printed, folded, and worshipped. Each week, families flipped through its pages to plan their entire viewing life. What time is your show on? What channel is the big movie airing? Without a television guide, you were lost in the static. It listed every program, from early morning cartoons to late-night reruns. You circled shows in pen. You memorized time slots. You argued with siblings over what to watch and when. Sometimes you even set a timer on the VCR to record your favorites, if you could figure out how. Television Guide came with featured articles, behind-the-scenes trivia, and occasionally a glossy cover that made you feel like you were holding something special. It was not just a magazine, it was a map, a lifeline, and a reminder that missing your show meant waiting until summer reruns or, gasp, never seeing it again. Kids today will never understand the pressure of being ready at exactly 7 o'clock, or the heartbreak of flipping the page and realizing your favorite show was preempted by a holiday parade. The television guide was small, simple, and essential, and in a world before scrolling, it helped us find our way through the glow of the living room screen. Long before music was digital, it spun on plastic. Record players with built-in speakers were the backbone of every teenager's room and every family living room. They were bulky, boxy, and usually brown or beige. But when you placed that needle on the groove, the room changed. You might remember hearing the Jackson 5, the Carpenters, or Fleetwood Mac for the very first time through one of these machines. The sound was warm, slightly fuzzy, and crackled at the edges, but it was alive. Kids would stack their 45s, adjust the tone arm, and lower the needle with care. These were not sleek devices. They were furniture. Some had lids that closed like a suitcase. Others had knobs you had to gently coax into the right spot. Volume? Not much. But intimacy? All the way. You sat close to it. You knew every skip and scratch on your favorite record. You could play the same song 10 times in a row and it felt new every time. It was not about convenience, it was about connection. The record player was not background noise, it was the centerpiece of your downtime. Hearing one today might just make you stop, listen, and remember who you were when that song first played. The Nerf ball was not just a toy, it was permission. Permission to throw, jump, chase, and tackle indoors without worrying about broken windows or bruised siblings. When it launched in 1969, it quietly revolutionized playtime in the 1970s. This soft, squishy ball, usually bright orange or yellow, was more than foam. It was freedom. For kids stuck indoors during rainy days or cold winters, the Nerf ball turned living rooms into stadiums. It was tossed down hallways, bounced off walls, smacked off ceilings, and it never hurt anyone. That was its genius. It let kids be rowdy without consequences. No one had to yell, "Not in the house," anymore. Suddenly, tag became dodgeball. A lazy Sunday became a full-blown game of catch, and for many kids, it was the first time a ball felt safe. It was something even little siblings could join in on. Parents accepted it, teachers tolerated it, kids lived for it. The Nerf ball was not flashy. It did not talk or light up. But it had this perfect bounce, this perfect softness, and it never failed to make playtime better. In a world full of do not touch, Nerf was the one thing kids were always allowed to grab and throw as hard as they could. VHS rental adventures were more than just picking a movie. They were the night's main event. You walked into the store greeted by rows of clamshell cases, each one shouting for your attention with over-the-top artwork and dramatic taglines. New releases lined the front wall, but they were often already rented, marked by empty plastic holders and your own growing disappointment. So you wandered. Comedy? Horror? Something animated for your little brother? You judged movies by their cover. You flipped tapes to read the backs, squinted at blurry screenshots, and made last-minute switches at checkout. There was pressure. Choose wisely. You had this movie for 2 nights, maybe 3. Forget to rewind? Expect a fee. Some stores even had a "Be Kind Rewind" sign that became a national motto. You got home, made popcorn, and watched together as a family. The sound of the tape sliding into the VCR meant it was officially movie night. VHS rentals turned average evenings into little adventures. They made choosing a movie feel like a quest. And even though we stream everything now, nothing beats the charm of browsing those old shelves and hoping your top pick had not been snatched first. Before the sleek inline skates of the 1990s, there were the clunky, lovable roller skates with metal wheels. They strapped over your shoes with thick leather buckles and screeched across every surface like they were mad at the floor. If you skated indoors, you sounded like a marching band. If you braved the sidewalk, every crack was a threat. But none of that mattered. Because once you got going, it was freedom. You were flying, wobbling, yes, but flying. These skates had no padding, no ankle support, and no mercy. But they came with memories, rolling through driveways, circling the garage, racing your siblings until someone wiped out. You remember the sound they made on concrete, the clatter as you tried to stop, the feeling of falling and getting back up anyway. Roller discos made them iconic. Kids and teens glided under colored lights, surrounded by Bee Gees and Donna Summer, feeling cooler than they ever had. You might have never mastered the spin. You probably fell more than you want to admit. But those skates, those metal-wheeled monstrosities, were the soundtrack to a whole chapter of growing up. They were heavy, loud, and impossible to forget. Micronauts were not household names like G.I. Joe or Star Wars toys, but for the kids who loved them, they were everything. Small, strange, and endlessly customizable, Micronauts were the science fiction building blocks of your imagination. Released in the late 1970s, they came with magnetic limbs, clear plastic torsos, interchangeable armor, and ships you could take apart and reconfigure 100 different ways. There was no show at first, no comic book, just you and your mind filling in the gaps. What planet did they come from? What powers did they have? It did not matter. You decided. The Micronauts were yours. One day they were heroes. The next, they were villains. Their limbs could pop off. Their vehicles turned into bases, walkers, or weapons. They were not just action figures. They were tools for storytelling. And every kid who had a handful knew the thrill of inventing whole galaxies on the living room floor. While other toys had scripts, Micronauts had potential. They invited you to build the adventure, not just follow it. They were futuristic, weird, and wild, and that made them unforgettable. In a time before everything came with instructions, Micronauts handed you the pieces and whispered, "Go create." Cabbage Patch Kid frenzy turned toy stores into battlegrounds. These soft-bodied dolls with unique, slightly odd faces were the must-have gift of the 1980s. Each one came with a birth certificate and adoption papers, making it feel like you were bringing home a real baby. But getting your hands on one? That was another story. Parents lined up at dawn. Some camped overnight. Others sprinted through department stores in scenes more suited to action movies than holiday shopping. There were arguments, tears, the occasional tackle, and when someone finally scored a doll, they clutched it like it was made of gold. Kids loved them. They named them, dressed them, and carried them everywhere. Some families had to settle for knockoffs with names like Garden Patch Pals that never quite felt the same. But if you had a real one, you were a legend. Looking back, it seems wild that a doll caused so much chaos. But in that moment, nothing mattered more. Cabbage Patch Kids were not just toys. They were trophies. Proof that your parents had braved the crowds and won. And decades later, those round faces still sit on shelves, quietly remembering the madness they caused. In the 1970s, getting a TV signal felt like summoning the spirits. You did not just turn on the television and sit back, you had to work for it. That meant rabbit ears. That meant stretching, adjusting, and holding metal rods in every direction. And when the fuzz would not go away, there was only one solution: tinfoil. It crinkled, it sparkled, and somehow it worked. Wrapped like a desperate science experiment, your television antenna became a sculpture of hope and frustration. You might remember your sibling being the designated antenna holder, standing on one leg, arm raised, frozen in place while the rest of the family watched. It was trial and error, comedy, and chaos. The goal? A clear picture, even if it only lasted 5 minutes. There were always threats not to move, begging someone not to breathe too hard, cheering when the static cleared, booing when it came back. It was not just about the picture, it was about the ritual, the teamwork, the sacrifice. You learned patience. You learned creativity. You learned that a ball of tinfoil could mean the difference between watching your favorite show or sitting in silence. It was frustrating, ridiculous, and completely unforgettable. The Easy Bake Oven was not a toy. It was a rite of passage. a small, pastel-colored appliance that turned powdered mix into warm, edible cake using nothing but a light bulb. And somehow, that tiny miracle made you feel like a real chef. It was introduced earlier, but by the 1970s, every kid wanted one. Boys, girls, it did not matter. The Easy Bake Oven was your ticket to independence. You measured, you mixed, you waited. That soft hum of the bulb heating up your mini metal pan was suspense in its purest form. Would it bake right? Would it burn? Would Mom let you make another? The cakes were not good. They were dry, crumbly, and oddly sweet. But no one cared, because they were yours. You did not help Mom. You did not watch someone else. You baked it. That mattered. It was messy. It was thrilling. It was a small slice of adulthood you could claim all for yourself. And every time you opened that tiny oven door and pulled out a crooked, half-baked cupcake, you were not just making dessert. You were making memories. You were learning to take pride in the process, even when the result was barely edible. Leg warmers were a fashion miracle, pointless and perfect all at once. Originally designed for dancers to keep their muscles warm, they jumped out of the studio and into the mainstream thanks to aerobics videos and pop culture icons. Suddenly, everyone was wearing them, over tights, over jeans, even over bare legs. They came in neon, in stripes, in fluffy pastels. Some matched outfits, others clashed proudly. And they served no actual purpose unless you were stretching at a bar or leaping across a dance floor. But no one cared. Leg warmers made you feel like you were part of something glamorous and athletic, even if the closest you got to working out was lifting a hairbrush to lip sync in the mirror. Schools were filled with rows of students rocking scrunched-up fabric around their shins. Some slouched them just above the ankle. Others pulled them high like woolly socks from the future. They were soft, they were cozy, and they were everywhere. Looking back, they might seem silly, but they were fun, expressive, and totally 1980s. And for a few years, they made everyone feel like a star in their own low-budget dance movie. Playgrounds used to be a little more dangerous, and the metal slide on asphalt was the crown jewel of poor design. In the 1970s, nearly every school or park had one. It stood tall, often 2 stories high, baking in the sun until it could sear the back of your legs. No shade, no padding. Just you, gravity, and a prayer. The steps up were made of thin metal bars. The top had no real guardrails, and when you slid down, you hit that blacktop like a dropped steak. But we lined up for it anyway, over and over. There was something thrilling about the danger. It was a rite of passage, a fast, hot, jolting ride that ended in a dusty scrape or bruised elbow. Teachers watched from afar. Parents shrugged. Kids were expected to bounce back. If you made it to the bottom without a scream, you earned bragging rights. If you got burned, you wore it like a badge. Safety standards have come a long way since then, but so much of that fearless, feral childhood play was tied to moments like these. Today, it is hard to believe we once thought that was normal, but deep down, part of us misses it. Stretch Armstrong was every kid's first lesson in pushing limits. At first glance, he looked like an ordinary blonde-haired action figure in wrestling trunks. But once you grabbed his arms and started pulling, the magic began. Stretch could extend over 3 feet and still return to his original shape. And that blew kids' minds. In a decade filled with rigid plastic toys, Stretch was soft, heavy, and squishy. A living stress ball you could battle, bend, and battle again. Every child who had one eventually asked the same question. How far can he go before he breaks? Some froze him, some boiled him, some tied him to door handles and pulled. Most Stretch Armstrongs met tragic ends, with oozy red gel leaking out like a horror movie. But it was all part of the experience. He was a science experiment you could hug. And even if he only lasted a summer, the memory stayed. He was not just a toy, he was a challenge, an obsession. And for many 1970s kids, Stretch Armstrong was the first thing they ever tested to destruction just to see what would happen. That weird, heavy feeling in your hands, that was resilience. That was curiosity. That was pure childhood. Stirrup pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But stirrup pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, stirrup pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. If you grew up in the 1970s, the Atari 2600 was more than just a machine. It was a revolution. Released in 1977, it looked like something from a spaceship with its wood grain panel and chunky switches. But once you plugged it in and inserted a cartridge, everything changed. Pong, Missile Command, Space Invaders, these games turned your television into a battlefield, a racetrack, or a galaxy far, far away. It was not just about playing. It was about being inside the game. You became the paddle, the ship, the pixelated hero. The joystick was awkward and stiff, but it gave you power, real power. Before Atari, play was physical, outside with balls, bikes, or board games. After Atari, play became immersive. You could lose hours in those blinking, buzzing worlds. You could lose yourself. Parents worried, teachers warned, but kids knew better. They felt something shifting, a new kind of play, a new kind of escape. Video games were not just mindless distractions. They were portals, and Atari was the key. It changed what it meant to be a kid. It made your house feel infinite, and whether you were dodging aliens or chasing high scores, you were part of the first generation to hold a digital future in your hands. If this brought something back, share your coolest 70s memory below. Tap like and subscribe so we keep remembering together.